Hello, my friend. Anna Sabramowitz here. And in this podcast, I wanted to talk to you about scenarios, how to use them as an augmentation service, but also some strategies on how to actually take your face-to-face workshop and use scenarios in it in a blended version, like in using Zoom, and how to make that awesome. And so I'm thinking that this is one of the things that a lot of people might struggle with, because I get this question and I have this discussion with a lot of my clients. So hopefully this is something that you'll also benefit from. So stay tuned.
You're here because you want more engagement, more delight, more fun, more learning. You're hungry for change and willing to take action.
If you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original.
Welcome to the E-Learning Scenario Design Podcast with Anna Sabramowitz.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
Let's take learning to the next level.
All right, my friends. So thanks so much for tuning in. All right. So if you've listened to my podcast before, then you know that I'm a scenario design fan, like mega time. Obviously, it's scenario design podcast. But one of the other things that I always think about is how my scenario and the scenarios that my clients and my students will integrate, how they fit into the bigger picture. And one of the things that came up this week is that the scenario that we were talking about with this client, what they wanted is they have an expert that's now finally available. Like, this person is on some sort of a leave or a quasi sabbatical, because the person is actually involved in humanitarian relief kind of situations. And so, when those things are on, they're on. And also, if you have great people and they're very highly experienced and hard to find, well, they're usually super busy and always in demand, and it's very hard to find them. But this person is, I think, just, especially in that world, you have a tendency to, after some time, to really need a break, because you can burn out, need to see your family and all those other things. So this person is available, and especially because they're still kind of like they're off work in that area, but they're now available as an expert, it's a great time for them to reflect on some of the strategies that they've applied and some of the lessons that they've learned. And I thought, wow, this is a great opportunity. Let's jump on this, because this person might not be available again for a long time. And so that was great. And one of the ways that, the scenarios would be integrated would be into a leadership program where new leaders and potentially even seasoned leaders would be exposed to scenarios that this person, that we've extracted from this person, and they've given their kind of insight on, like, some of the consequences that happened, tie this into the context of where they were applying these things. And that was all awesome. However, one of the things that came out of the conversation is that this scenario is supposed to support people who are all over the world. They're just new and emerging leaders, and they join the company. Some of them are brand new to this particular role, so they've just moved up the ranks in the organization, and now they're ready for this next level. Or they're people who have been in that role, but in different organizations, are just joining the organization and now need to be kind of basically shepherded into the way this company, this organization does things, and the way they lead, and the protocols and processes that they follow, and also the culture of leadership, right? And that's really a huge thing right now. It's not just about having people who are leaders themselves, but people who are also very comfortable in developing new leaders and creating a team around them that will function when they're gone. So it becomes less of an egocentric kind of setup where we're going to make you number one. It's more of a, what are we doing to help you facilitate a team that when you're moved to a different place because there's a need for you or something happens, that team has been empowered to make decisions and actually helps you focus on some of the key areas that you're really good at, while they're also developing their own expertise and becoming leaders in their own right? So, the challenge with running, let's say, a face-to-face course for new leaders is that, especially if you're an international organization, there is absolutely no way you can scale that so that it actually so that you actually reach people at the right time. Like basically what happens is it's sporadic hiring, sporadic movement. And so as emergencies come up, as people get shuffled, you'll get, a new leader here, a new leader there, and it's all over the world. Now, one of the things that happens, especially with these face-to-face courses, is that you can't always offer them because to be able to offer a face-to-face course, you need some critical mass, right? You need at least, let's say, 12 people. And also in order to justify the cost of flying those people out someplace and getting them all together and then getting a trainer and accommodation, all those things, like it takes some serious coordination to get all these people together. And one of the challenges is that, let's say somebody joins a new team as a leader, well, they might not get to that training for like 6 months. And I remember being in a situation like that where I was at I started at this new company, and I was in an orientation, like my second day that I was there. And what was so funny is I was sitting beside this one guy, and he said, "So how long have you been working for the company?" I said, "Well, I just started yesterday." He says, "Oh, that's hilarious. I've been here for a year." And I said, "Well, yeah, but this is orientation." And he says, "I know, but because the amount of people that need to be involved to actually make this orientation happen, like we had all these different department heads and all these people come by and actually do all these presentations for us. What happened is he was hired basically the week after that ran, and they could only afford to run it once a year. So he had to wait a whole year for that new employee orientation, for all the welcomes and everything from people who basically ran all these different departments in the company. So I thought, wow, that's kind of like he was a little bit diminished because of that. For me, it was great. It was my day 2, right? Also, one of the challenges was that because it was my day 2, I really barely remember what happened during that session because I was still just wrapping my mind around my role and all those other things. So that's a challenge, right? So we're discussing this and we're talking about it in the humanitarian context, all these leaders, but this really applies to all companies that have new department hires that are leaders. Let's say you want to get them in right away so that their footing is set up really strongly, and they realize they're given some of that background about the ethos of your company, but also who they can engage for help when they need it, right? Those are really important things because if you just throw people in the deep end, yes, some of them will, actually most of them, if they've gotten to that point, will be able to figure it out. But if you are there to actually help somebody who is already an A player, and you help them with all these tools, resources, and all these other things that can help them make better decisions, they start faster. Like you don't have to wait for 6 months for them to start delivering. Like that, you can set it up through the experience that you've had with your other leaders and drawing on that coaching mentorship model to actually get them there faster. So we discussed 2 opportunities to leverage scenarios, and I thought I would share them here and then actually go on a little bit deeper into one of them. So one of them was that let's say you design scenarios, let's say from this person who's now on like a quasi sabbatical. You get all these leadership situations in a scenario, right? And I'm talking about making this fully online. Like somebody logs into, let's say, their intranet portal, and they see this, leadership challenge for new leaders, or as they just get hired, they're told you have to do this leadership challenge. So log in and just click on it, and they get presented with a situation. It's a really great story. And they're like, oh yeah, look, this could be me, right? This is the person I could be, or the person where I am now. I'm a new leader and I'm struggling with how I'm going to make decisions in this particular area. And then they work through that scenario. They're asked to make some decisions, and then they get the consequences of those decisions. And based on, let's say, 6 to 8 of these scenario decisions, they at the end are very clear on whether they actually need more help and what the particular gaps are, and also maybe the reality of that role. Like, these are the things I have to prepare for, right? So the scenario can serve a lot of awesome, it can be a wonderful tool, let's just say. So then at that point, we're thinking, we have everybody who is going to be a leader, or everybody who is aspiring to be a leader, can go through this scenario. And at the end of it, based on their score, based on the outcome, they can either, and so this is one of the things that we came up with, is using the scenario as a diagnostic for this person personally. So it's more catered. They can choose to either attend the live training session when it is being offered. In the meantime, if it is not being offered very soon, what they can do is either look up a resource that's been selected to support them in this, because now they're actually a little bit hungry for that knowledge, because they actually realize they need it, because we've put them through a series of situations that they're now guessing whether they actually need something or not. They're a little bit unsure, or they're like, wow, I thought I knew how to solve that, but that's not how it worked out. Or, wow, I thought I knew what it was like to be in this role, but the context is different, and I think I need to do a little bit more learning. Which is what happens to most people, is that they come in and they have a lot of experience that they can draw on, but then the context changes a little bit and they need a little bit of a shift, and they need a little bit more info to get them ready for that. So at the very end of that scenario, based on, some outcomes that you say, okay, your score was this, and maybe what we recommend is, if you weren't confident in this area, this is what we recommend. Here's a resource that's on our, maybe intranet, or here's a resource that's on our academy that's online, or here's a book that you should read, and then, or here's a group, a workbook, a workplace Facebook group that you should join, and there we have a mentorship opportunity. So you should, ask somebody if they want to be your accountability partner while you're working through these exercises. So it really can be just as this person said, which is so cool, the scenario can serve as this prism where somebody comes in through the scenario and then they're taken on a different path depending on their specific needs, which is really cool. And also what it does is it accommodates people, even if they're coming in and something is not going to be offered in the next 3 months or 6 months, right? Now, the other thing I was thinking is that still, this idea of online webinars and online cohorts, as far as walking people through training, is so underutilized, and people are still doing it. When I see some of these webinars that are being offered to people and then recorded, I want to poke my eyes out, because the thing is, a lot of times, and I mean, when you look at some of these live, I don't want to make anybody sad or angry, I'm sorry, but it's really got to be said. So I'll go to these webinars, or I'll see what people have on their intranets as far as like orientation, and it's basically a recording of somebody going through slides. And I was like, okay, so already we know that the face-to-face version is horrible, because somebody has to sit there and just like pretend they're engaged, and there's just no way, right? Like for a little while, and then it loses its awesomeness. And also most people's slides are terrible still. I mean, if you're struggling with your slides, check out Nancy Duarte and her work, because there's tons of books on how to design and tell a great story with slides, and people are still terrible in this area. They're still reading text. So I see this and they're like, yeah, we recorded the webinar, now it's available online for somebody now to just watch 60 minutes of somebody flipping through slides with poor audio. And I was like, wow, okay. It's funny because, I'll say to those people, like when I get a chance, I don't get a chance too often, but I'll say, okay, when was the last time you watched a TED Talk? And how long was the TED Talk? And they're like, yeah, I watched a TED Talk. It's 18 minutes. I'm like, do you know it takes them a year to prepare that 18 minutes for it to be compelling? And now you're expecting people to jump on and watch like 5 webinars that are an hour long, and they're just some guy or gal droning on about like procedures. That's horrible, right? So we got to have that empathy for the people that we're training. And I'm always like, empathy for the learner. If that was you, would you sit here? No way, unless you love the sound of your own voice, which is why I'm putting on this podcast, guys. So here's what I'm thinking with this. This is how I'm thinking of structuring this, and this is, and I've done this many, many times, but it's mostly been in the, in private courses, and I just want to, I make sure that everybody is using this as much as possible, and I'll send this over to my customer because I think that they'll actually get a kick out of this. So, instead of running a face-to-face course, which in some places still is seen as like the epitome of awesome, and I understand, and because I think the reason that happens is that people are really excited about being in the same space with other humans and collaborating. Because really, I bet you, if you apply to the Pareto principle, which is the 80-20 rule, to those face-to-face workshops, those little nuggets where people actually get to talk to each other, strategize, and solve problems, that is that 20% that makes for 80% of the learning. The rest is you trying to stay awake. However, that why people love them is because of that 20% of that time, if that is spent collaborating. So I'm thinking, why do you have to force people to go to the same place for 4 days, burn them out, while really they're really craving, and what they really need to get value out of is that collaboration piece, right? So here's how we do it. You can, all those resources that are through the PowerPoint, they can be actually beautifully done and more meaningfully done by capturing them on, let's say something like Rise or a really dynamic podcast recording, so that people can get that information many different ways before they join a cohort that's online. The cohort is, say, group of leaders that you have. They pop in once a week for an hour, and you run that for, let's say, 6 weeks. And then what happens is during those, let's say, Zoom sessions, and Zoom is one of my favorite tools because it is easy at work. You can click it from the browser, no need to download stuff. It's just, if you're not using Zoom, I hope you're using something super easy for your collaboration, virtual collaboration, because it is a robust tool and you really got to use it. So what happens is you set people up with the, let's say you have them watch a scenario or participate in a scenario, or even just read something that's going to be really contextual that they have to think about and then work on during your Zoom session. During your Zoom session, everybody, you're not talking very much. There's not very much of that teaching in there. What people are doing is applying and collaborating. So you use the rooms, the breakout rooms, for people to answer questions, and these could be scenario questions, which I suggest, like, let's say you have a plan where we meet for an hour for 6 weeks. As leaders, you get to know those people, but also every single, let's say, of those 1 hours is actually focused on you working with your group to solve a scenario problem and discuss it and see alternatives and see what are the differences in your context. So what happens is that over time, over 6 weeks, we work through 6 scenarios. But what's wonderful is the benefits of structuring things this way. So they go away, they read, maybe they brush up on their stuff, you prep them, you say, here's a scenario that's going to happen. How would you solve it? Come prepared, because your teammates are going to expect you to prepare something and be ready with how you are going to approach it. Then we debrief. We also keep that going. So here's why I think this is the way to do these face-to-face things. One is you now have an accountability partner, because you're not just randomly showing up to just any webinar with random strangers. After week 2, you've basically got a momentum set up, and you know the people you're meeting. It's wonderful. I mean, whenever I have those virtual sessions, I always turn on the camera, and I encourage everybody else to do so, because getting to know each other's faces, even that way, after 6 weeks, you've got partnerships, you've got friends. This is wonderful. And they're all in the same role. They're all struggling and they've worked through things. So you're teaching them how to communicate effectively, how to have relationships with other people across the bounds. Like, they're going to have to be doing this anyways in your organization if it's an international one. Now they are comfortable with the tech, so they can start doing their own sessions if they want to. How awesome is that? Also, you've created a cohort of people. And those are the things like long-term relationships are what makes people stay at a company. So they're no longer isolated. They know they can jump on a call. There's something to look forward to. They have people who are on the same kind of cutting edge of leadership or working through problems. That's why people stay at places. That's what keeps them going. It's not the pay, it's the opportunity to work with awesome rock stars and to do stuff that challenges them personally. So boom, you've got that over 6 weeks. It's great. This is the other thing. The regular schedule gives people something to look forward to, and there's this pace that's set, which is awesome. The other thing is that this to me is the next level. When you take a 4-day session, right, and put people in it, after day 2, people burn out. There is no way you could just learn for 4 days straight without just feeling like there's a strain on you, right? Also, the other thing that happens is you're in a separate place from your workplace, learning things, and then you have to go back to your workplace, and now you're in a different environment, and you're trying to integrate all those lessons back into your environment. It's hard. It's very hard. So one of the things that this it's kind of crazy because I'm trying to basically hack the psychological piece. One of the things that you learn when you read anything by, let's say, Will Tellheimer and his reports on how people remember, the strategies to use to remember things and how to apply them is, let's say you're always studying in a blue room for a specific math test. Well, if you want to have better retrieval during a test, you want it to be either in the same blue room or blue room period. So those are things that actually trigger memories. So one of the things you want to do, let's say, and you have the opportunity to do when somebody is actually learning leadership stuff, they're actually in their environment when you're using Zoom. They're probably at their desk. So if they're discussing important decisions and they're making ahas, now the ahas are tied to their specific environment, which is absolutely fantastic. Now every time they look at their mug, they think, oh yeah, that scenario about where we talked about this. It's there. Do you know what I mean? Like the environment supports it. They're not jarred out of their environment. They're in it. It's just wonderful. And also the other thing is by spacing these things, they're able to experience a situation, something they discussed with their colleagues, maybe protocols they didn't really get, and then they go out into the real world. And as they're, doing their regular stuff that week, that's in their mind. And then not only is that in their mind, the next week they come back, you should give them a chance to discuss how that has applied or been applied in their world. How did they think about it? Were there opportunities for them to actually reflect on that during that week? So you're really just revisiting concepts, revisiting things for reflection, which is when people learn the most, right? So instead of it being jam-packed into 4 days of just like, oh my God, I'm trying to be the best I can be in 4 days, you're really integrating into their daily weekly reflection process. And that's what makes awesome breakthroughs in leadership. And then the other thing, which I totally talked about already, is this idea of burnout. It's just after 4 days, let's say, of being in the same room with strangers and trying to learn every day, you crash. And it's just, I'm thinking that the returns on that are diminishing. I don't know if you've ever been to like a full day workshop. And full day workshop is great if it's high energy and you're applying, but you have to realize that there's a lull in the afternoon of just people going, I'm ready to unplug. So for me, a 2-day workshop is max. And if you're going to have a 2-day workshop, the first part of the workshop should be like people working in small groups. And the next day you should actually just be building stuff or heavily actually just being in the zone with your own project, because that's what's going to keep you engaged. If you're constantly learning and learning and listening and learning, it's overwhelming. You have to do a huge bit of learning and applying so that you're switching your mental shift. There's a mental shift there, because otherwise you'll just burn out. So that's one of the things I'm thinking is really when you're thinking about taking your workshop and even augmenting it with a scenario to see if people are already going to be there, What about just taking your scenarios, breaking them out into these 6 Zoom sessions? You don't have to fly anybody in. You actually can offer these every 6 weeks, these cohorts, right? Every 6 weeks you can actually offer it, which is wonderful. You're more agile. So the worst case scenario is if somebody joins and they missed the first cohort, they only have to wait 6 weeks for the next one to be offered, which is amazing, right? Instead of waiting, like my friend, a year to be able to go to the orientation for new leaders. So you really want to see how powerful this can be. The fact that people are now in their environments and applying this, and now you have 6 weeks of little chunks that they get to apply. So yeah, there's some logistical things there. Yeah, you have to prep the work as far as the resources that are available to them. But guess what? You already have all those resources. Now you just have to space them out a little bit better and make them available to them before they join each session. So I think that's really, if you're thinking about integrating scenarios, but also integrating some sort of a way to not only have accountability partners and also really engage people to apply and reflect, this is it. This is the way you should do it. Face-to-face is okay, but it's a high luxury. And also it should be used when needed, when it's appropriate, right? And so for scalable programs where you actually want high quality, this is the way to do it. So if you have any questions about how to run engaging workshops via Zoom, I can help you with that as well. Please reach out, Anna@annasabramowitz.com. Also, if you are interested in, if you are ready to go on a scenario project because you've got an expert in the field and they're ready to go and you're like, this is an opportunity once in a lifetime, let me know. I have a really short cycle of development for those scenarios, but they are tight. And so I need to have you kind of be ready for that project. So if you are, just go to scheduleanna.com and there you'll see basically my schedule, but also a form that asks you questions. And the questions are mainly like, do you have a project that you're working on right now? And are you ready to go? Because then I can help you. So I think that, like I said, one of the things that's important is when we're designing scenarios, we have to see where they fit in the ecosystem, as people like to say, the ecosystem of learning. And if you have this great scenario, but nobody knows that it exists, there's no supporting resources to actually take it to the next level, it's okay because it creates that aha moment for somebody, but it's not enough. Like you got to be the person who thinks 4, 5, 6 steps after to make that experience actually worth that effort, because you're gathering resources, you're spending people's time. Are you doing it in the right way? And what I love about even scenarios is that you can take that first digital experience that somebody had, and now take each scenario, pull it out, and put it into one of those Zoom workshop sessions and have people truly discuss it. Because when you're working on a scenario by yourself, you get the consequences. You might not necessarily agree, or you might think, what if that was in my context, would that be different? But now what you've done is you can take that same scenario, repurpose it, put it into the live synchronous virtual classroom workshop using, let's say, Zoom, and have people discuss the alternatives because they might not agree or they might have a better solution. So now that helps them not only engage with it once, but you're talking to them twice, and now they're discussing it with other leaders. So there's multiple ways. It's not a one-stop kind of thing like we've launched it and they've seen it. No, revisit it. And now you're driving home these values that you want to reinforce. You're driving home the reflection and decision-making that needs to be done. It's a beautiful thing. My hair is standing on end because I'm so excited about it. So I hope you have a wonderful week ahead of you. Also, thank you so much for subscribing and being a fan of this scenario design stuff, and also all things good and all things learning related. I really appreciate it, and I hope you found this one valuable. And if you did, share it with your friends, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week. Take care. Bye.
You're listening to the E-Learning Scenario Design Podcast with Anna Sabramowitz.